The Grand Council chamber buzzed with activity as delegates from across the galaxy filed in for the annual conquest planning session. The massive room, shaped like a bowl with rising tiers of seats, glowed with soft blue light from the artificial stars that dotted the ceiling. Hundreds of different species sat in their designated areas, some floating in anti-gravity bubbles, others resting in pools of liquid, and many sitting in standard chairs. At the lowest level, Council Elder Gray watched the gathering with his 4 eyes, each one focusing on a different section of the chamber. His scaled skin had long since faded from its youthful green to a pale white, marking his centuries of experience in galactic politics. Among the delegates, Ambassador Tom Smith sat quietly in the human section, wearing a simple black suit that stood out among the colorful and exotic outfits around him. He appeared to be reading something on his datapad, but those who knew him well could see the slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The chamber fell silent as Elder Gray raised his ceremonial staff. The annual conquest planning session is now in session. His voice boomed through the translation systems. Who wishes to present their proposal first? A young delegate from the Conquest Federation jumped up immediately. His purple skin gleamed under the starlight, and his antenna twitched with excitement. I, Delegate First Class Wilson of the Conquest Federation, request permission to present my proposal. Elder Gray nodded slowly. Proceed. Wilson practically bounced to the central platform, his enthusiasm apparent to everyone. Esteemed members of the Grand Council, I present to you the perfect target for our next great conquest. He paused for dramatic effect. Earth. The chamber erupted in laughter. Some delegates fell out of their chairs. Others changed colors rapidly in their species equivalent of hysterical giggling, and a few even had to leave the room to compose themselves. Wilson's antenna drooped slightly, but he continued. I'm serious. Think about it. They have abundant resources, a strategic position in their solar system, and they haven't even developed proper faster-than-light travel yet. More laughter followed. A blob-like creature in the third row actually split into 2 from shaking so hard with amusement. Elder Gray raised his staff again, restoring order. Young Wilson, how long have you been in your position? 3 standard cycles. Elder, Wilson replied proudly. Ah. Elder Gray nodded. That explains it. Before we proceed further with your proposal, I believe we should hear from someone with more experience regarding Earth. Admiral Blake, would you share your insights? From the upper tiers, a tall figure stood up. Admiral Blake, a veteran of countless space campaigns, made his way down to the central platform. His mechanical leg clicked softly against the floor, a souvenir from a past military campaign. As he passed Wilson, he patted the young delegate on the shoulder. Young friend, Blake said, his voice gravelly from years of commanding troops across the vacuum of space, I understand your enthusiasm. I truly do. But there's a reason why Earth is marked with a triple red warning in our conquest database. Wilson's antenna perked up with curiosity. Triple red. But that's reserved for death worlds. Blake finished. And Earth. Earth isn't just any death world. It's DTE Death World. The one that makes other death worlds look like vacation resorts. In his seat, Ambassador Smith's smile grew slightly wider as he continued pretending to read his datapad. Blake turned to address the entire chamber. With the Council's permission, I'd like to explain exactly why suggesting an invasion of Earth is the kind of idea that ends careers and species. He activated the chamber's holographic display system. Let's start with the basics of why Earth is different from any other world we've encountered. Wilson, now looking considerably less confident, took a seat in the front row. He couldn't help but notice that Ambassador Smith had finally looked up from his datapad, and the human's eyes held a look of amused patience, like a parent watching a child learn a valuable lesson the hard way. The lights dimmed as Admiral Blake began his presentation, and the chamber leaned forward, ready to be reminded once again why Earth remained unconquered in a galaxy of conquerors. Admiral Blake's holographic display filled the chamber with an image of Earth, spinning slowly to show all its continents and oceans. The gathered delegates watched as the planet's surface transformed to show its various terrains in vivid detail. "Let's start with the basics," Blake said, zooming in on a desert region. "This is what humans call the Sahara Desert. Temperatures here regularly reach levels that would cook most species alive. And humans?" He clicked a button, showing images of people running across the sand dunes. "They race across it for fun." Wilson's antenna twitched nervously. "But surely they use protective equipment." "Water bottles and hats," Blake replied dryly. "Sometimes not even that." The display shifted to the Antarctic. On the same planet, we have this. Ice fields stretched as far as the eye could see. Temperatures here drop so low that most species' blood would freeze solid. Humans built research stations here and live in them year-round. Again, for fun and what they call science. Ambassador Smith pulled out a small thermos and took a sip of hot coffee, earning nervous glances from nearby delegates. Blake continued, "But here's the real problem: Earth's gravity." The display showed a comparison chart. At 9.8 meters per second squared, Earth has gravity 1.3 times stronger than the galactic average. This means every human is naturally stronger than 90% of known spacefaring species. He played a video of human Olympic weightlifters. Several delegates gasped as they watched humans lift many times their own body weight. "And these aren't even their soldiers," Blake added. "These are their athletes." "But we have powered armor," Wilson protested. "Surely that levels the playing field." Blake smiled grimly. "Funny you should mention that." He switched to footage of humans in various extreme sports. "These humans are jumping out of flying vehicles for entertainment. These ones are climbing frozen waterfalls. And these," he showed parkour runners leaping between buildings. "They're turning their cities into obstacle courses." The chamber grew quiet as they watched humans performing increasingly dangerous activities. "Now imagine," Blake said softly, "giving powered armor to a species that already does this without any protection. You're not leveling the playing field. You're giving supernatural abilities to creatures that already act like they're invincible." He switched to military footage. A human soldier can march for days carrying half their body weight in equipment. They can fight in temperatures from -40 to +40 degrees. They can swim through freezing water, crawl through burning deserts, and survive in jungles so dense that light barely reaches the ground. The display showed humans training in different environments: desert warfare, Arctic combat, jungle operations, and urban fighting. "And that's not even considering their endurance," Blake added. "Humans are what's known as persistence predators. Before they had weapons, they would chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Some humans still hunt this way for sport." Wilson's purple skin had turned a pale lavender. "But surely their physical advantages have made them soft with their technology." "An excellent point," Blake interrupted. "Let me show you their response to something they call a power outage." He played footage of humans continuing their daily lives without electricity, adapting immediately to primitive conditions. "They call this camping, and again, do it for fun." Ambassador Smith raised his hand for the first time. "If I may add, Admiral, you forgot to mention our sports." Blake's eyes widened slightly. "Ah, yes. Thank you, Ambassador." He switched to footage of rugby, ice hockey, and American football. "These are their non-lethal games." Several delegates moved uncomfortably in their seats as they watched humans deliberately colliding with each other at high speeds. "To summarize," Blake said, shutting down the display, "Earth's varying environments have produced a species that treats survival situations as recreational activities. They are stronger, more durable, and more adaptable than nearly any species we've encountered." He turned to Wilson. "And this is just their physical capabilities. Should I continue with their military history?" Wilson, now a very pale shade of purple, simply nodded, unable to look away from the frozen image of a human running through fire. as part of what was labeled as basic training. A new figure approached the central platform as Admiral Blake stepped aside. Professor Brown, the Council's military historian, adjusted her hovering platform to match the height of the speaking podium. Her species' crystalline form caught the light from the artificial stars above, creating small rainbows across the chamber floor. "Let me tell you about time," she began, her translated voice smooth and clear. "Specifically, let me tell you about how humans use it differently than any species we've studied." The holographic display showed a primitive human on horseback. This was human warfare roughly 800 years ago. The image changed rapidly, showing progression through muskets, cannons, tanks, planes, and finally, spacecraft. "And this is them now." Murmurs spread through the chamber. "Most species," Professor Brown continued, "take thousands of years to make such technological leaps. Humans did it in less time than a standard council member's lifespan." She paused. "They went from horse riding to spaceflight in the time it takes my species to reach adolescence." Wilson raised his hand. "But doesn't that mean their technology is primitive compared to ours?" "An excellent question," Brown replied. "Tell me, how long did it take your engineers to copy and improve their nuclear technology after we first observed it?" Wilson's antenna drooped. "They're still working on it." "Exactly." Brown displayed a graph showing technological advancement rates. Humans don't just develop technology. They master it, break it, rebuild it, and improve it at a pace that our analysts still struggle to explain. And they do this best under pressure. The display shifted to show various human conflicts. Here's the fascinating part. Humans developed most of their key technologies during what they call wartime. When they fight each other, their innovation rate increases exponentially. Ambassador Smith nodded quietly, taking another sip of coffee. "But surely," Wilson tried again, "their constant warfare means they're divided and weak." Brown's crystalline form flickered with what passed for laughter in her species. "Let me show you something interesting." The display showed various human nations fighting each other, then immediately uniting against a common threat. Humans have a saying, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." She played historical footage of former enemies becoming allies. They can go from trying to destroy each other to fighting side by side in less time than it takes to schedule a council meeting. And they never, ever forget how to fight. The chamber grew silent as Brown displayed more data. Every combat technique they've ever developed, they preserve. Their soldiers train in ancient hand-to-hand combat alongside modern weapons. They keep their old weapons maintained and ready, even as they develop new ones. But Wilson looked confused. Why maintain obsolete technology? Because Brown's voice carried a hint of admiration. Humans understand something that many species never grasp. Everything can fail. Their most advanced weapons can be disrupted, their technology can be jammed, their supplies can be cut off. So they make sure every soldier knows how to fight with everything from their bare hands to their most advanced weapons. She showed footage of human military training. They have a practice they call back to basics. Even their most elite soldiers regularly train with primitive weapons and survival techniques. Every human soldier is required to be lethal with or without technology. The display shifted to show guerrilla warfare tactics. And if you're thinking of a quick, overwhelming victory, consider this. Humans invented something called asymmetric warfare. They excel at turning superior force against itself. The more powerful the invading army, the more tools they have to work with. Ambassador Smith finally spoke up. "We have another saying. Necessity is the mother of invention." He smiled at Wilson. "Would you like to guess how creative we get when necessary?" Professor Brown nodded. "Thank you, Ambassador." She turned back to the chamber. "To summarize, in recorded history, every species that has attempted to invade Earth has failed. Not just failed, they've failed so completely that we've had to piece together what happened from scattered debris and garbled distress signals." She shut down the display, her crystalline form dimming slightly. "The humans have a concept called total war. No other species we've encountered has anything quite like it. Let's hope none of us ever has to learn firsthand what it means. Wilson, now barely able to maintain his composed purple shade, looked like he wanted to sink into his chair and disappear. Dr. Green shuffled to the central platform, her protective environment suit making soft whirring sounds with each movement. As the council's leading xenobiologist, she rarely left her laboratory, making her appearance at the chamber all the more significant. "Before I begin," she said, setting up her equipment, "I should mention that I'm wearing this suit because I just returned from Earth observation." She pointed to her sealed suit. "This isn't for my protection anymore. It's for yours." The delegates in the front rows discreetly moved their seats back. "Earth," Dr. Green continued, activating a microscopic display, "is what we classify as a Level 5 biological hazard zone. To put that in perspective, Level 6 is theoretical because we've never found anything worse than Earth." The display showed various microscopic organisms. These are some of Earth's smallest life forms. They call them bacteria and viruses. There are more varieties of these organisms in a handful of Earth's soil than on some entire planets. Wilson raised his hand timidly. "But surely our medical technology." "Let me tell you about Research Station 23, Dr. Green interrupted. "It was our most advanced biological research station. The entire facility was rated for Level 4 containment. They were studying Earth's common cold virus." She paused. "The station doesn't exist anymore." Ambassador Smith tried to hide a sneeze, causing nearby delegates to flinch. "The humans," Dr. Green continued, "live in this soup of microscopic predators. Their bodies are essentially biological warfare factories. They're not just immune to most of these organisms, they host them. A single human carries enough biological material to devastate an unprepared planet." The display shifted to show human medical facilities. Humans have spent their entire existence in an evolutionary arms race with these organisms. Their immune systems are so aggressive that they sometimes attack their own bodies by mistake. They consider this a reasonable trade-off. She clicked to the next slide, showing various Earth creatures. "And it's not just microscopic threats. Earth's wildlife evolved alongside humans. Consider this. On most worlds, a venomous creature uses its venom to kill. On Earth, many creatures have venom strong enough to kill hundreds of times over. They had to evolve this way because humans would simply survive weaker doses." The chamber was completely silent now. "We once sent a research team to study Earth's insects," Dr. Green said quietly. "Just the insects. 3 researchers died from what humans call bee stings. The survivors developed new allergies just from being on Earth for a week. Through protective suits." She brought up a new diagram. "This is what happens to non-Earth life forms exposed to Earth's atmosphere. The high oxygen content is toxic to most species. The nitrogen ratio is all wrong. And don't even get me started on their water." "Their water?" Wilson asked weakly. "Yes, their water. It's one of the most powerful universal solvents we've ever encountered. They drink it. For fun." She shook her head. "They're so used to it that they add things to make it bubble. They freeze it for entertainment. Some of them climb frozen waterfalls of it." Ambassador Smith took another sip from his thermos, causing several nearby delegates to shudder. "Any invasion force," Dr. Green continued, "would have to be completely isolated from Earth's environment. Complete atmospheric separation, no contact with Earth soil, no exposure to Earth life forms. One breach, one mistake, and your entire army could be infected with something that makes their flesh melt." She showed images of human hospitals. "And here's the worst part. Humans get sick all the time. They're used to it. Their bodies are constantly fighting off infections that would kill most species. They take pride in working while sick. They have a concept called sick days, which many of them view as optional." Dr. Green began packing up her equipment. "To summarize, Earth isn't just a death world. It's a biological weapon waiting to happen. The humans have evolved alongside the most aggressive biological system we've ever encountered, and they treat it as normal. She turned to Wilson, still interested in invasion. I haven't even gotten to their parasites yet. Did you know they intentionally eat certain ones? They call it cheese. Wilson, now looking distinctly ill, finally managed to speak. I think I understand why this presentation was necessary. Good, Dr. Green said, checking her suit's seals. Because I need to get back to decontamination. I high-fived a human child yesterday, and I'm still finding new proteins in my suit's filters. Dr. White, the council's lead behavioral analyst, glided to the central platform on his hover disk. His species' transparent skin revealed the rapid firing of neural patterns in his brain as he prepared to speak. Let's talk about the human mind. He began, his thought patterns creating beautiful colors beneath his skin. It's possibly the most fascinating and terrifying thing we've ever studied. The display lit up with brain scan comparisons. On the left, you see a normal spacefaring species response to danger. Notice the clear choice between fight or flight. He pointed to the human brain scan on the right. And here's a human. Notice anything strange? Wilson leaned forward despite himself. There are more patterns. Exactly, Dr. White said, his skin pulsing with academic excitement. Humans don't just choose between fight or flight. They have fight, flight, freeze, and most interestingly, what they call spite. Ambassador Smith smiled quietly. Spite, Dr. White continued, is a uniquely human concept. It's the willingness to suffer just to ensure their enemy suffers too. His skin flickered with concern. We've documented cases of humans continuing to fight with fatal injuries, just to take their killer with them. The display showed various human sporting events. Look at this. Humans deliberately engage in activities that cause pain and injury. They call it pushing their limits. They celebrate those who endure the most suffering to achieve their goals. Wilson's antenna drooped, but surely they have a breaking point. That's the interesting part, Dr. White replied. Yes, individual humans have breaking points. But as a species, he shook his head, causing ripples of color through his transparent form. The worse things get, the more humans unite. The more you hurt them, the stronger they become. The display showed historical footage of human cities recovering from disasters. When faced with overwhelming odds, humans don't give up. They get creative. They adapt. Most importantly, they get angry. He brought up psychological profiles. Humans have something they call competitive spirit. When you tell a human something is impossible, many of them take it as a personal challenge. They have sayings like "hold my beer," which often precede their most remarkable achievements or their most spectacular failures. Ambassador Smith chuckled, drawing nervous glances. But here's the truly terrifying part, Dr. White continued, his skin now pulsing with cautionary reds. Humans can form social bonds with anything. They form emotional attachments to simple cleaning robots. They rehabilitate predators that could kill them. They routinely risk their lives to save other species. The display showed humans rescuing various animals from dangerous situations. Any invading force would not only have to fight humans, but also deal with their inexplicable need to protect everything they've decided is under their care. He showed more footage. They anthropomorphize everything. They give names to their weapons. They feel emotional connections to vehicles. Some humans risk their lives to save plants they've grown attached to. Wilson looked confused. But how is that threatening? Because, Dr. White explained, his skin patterns showing increasing agitation. It means humans will fight you for everything. Not just their own survival, but for their pets, their plants, their favorite coffee shop, and that rock they think looks like their grandfather. Ambassador Smith patted his thermos protectively. In psychological testing, Dr. White continued, we found that humans respond to increased pressure by becoming more determined. In simulations, when faced with certain death, many humans choose to maximize damage to their opponent rather than try to survive. The chamber grew uncomfortably quiet. "They have a concept called going out with a bang," Dr. White said softly. "Many of their heroes are people who died destroying much larger enemies. They celebrate these stories. They teach them to their children." His skin shifted to scholarly purple. "To summarize, humans are psychologically hardwired to resist overwhelming force. They find inspiration in defeat. They form emotional bonds with everything around them, making every inch of their territory personal. And perhaps most importantly," he glanced at Wilson, "they never, ever forget their enemies." Ambassador Smith stood up. "If I may add, Doctor, we also never forget our friends." Dr. White's skin rippled with agreement. "Yes, that's crucial too. Humans are as passionate about alliance as they are about combat. Anyone foolish enough to invade Earth wouldn't just be fighting humans. They'd be fighting every species humans have befriended, traded with, or told a good joke to." Professor Red, the Council's cultural expert, walked to the platform wearing what appeared to be a human-style business suit. Her forearms adjusted the sleeves nervously as she spoke. "I've spent 50 years studying human entertainment," she began, "and I need to warn you. They've been preparing for alien invasions since before they had electricity." The display lit up with scenes from various human movies, books, and games. Humans spend an enormous amount of time imagining how to defeat superior forces. They call it entertainment. I call it the most thorough invasion defense planning I've ever seen. Wilson stared at the screen. "But those are just stories. Stories that millions of humans memorize and discuss in detail," Professor Red countered. "They actively look for flaws in alien invasion strategies. They've imagined and solved countless invasion scenarios before their morning coffee." Ambassador Smith raised his thermos in acknowledgement. "Let me show you something interesting," Professor Red continued, bringing up more images. "These are human children's toys." The display showed model spaceships, action figures, and strategy games. They turn invasion scenarios into games. Their children spend hours thinking about how to defeat alien armies. She clicked through more slides. They make their greatest fears into entertainment. They take their nightmares and turn them into problem-solving exercises. Every possible way to invade Earth has been thought about, discussed, and solved by millions of humans. The display showed online discussion forums. They debate these scenarios for fun. They find flaws in every strategy. And remember, these are just their civilians. Imagine what their actual military strategists are doing. Wilson's antenna drooped further. "But surely they can't have thought of everything." "They don't need to," Professor Red said, adjusting her suit again. "They've trained themselves to think creatively about invasion scenarios. They've developed something they call genre savvy, the ability to recognize and counter common tactical patterns." She brought up more examples. "They even turn historical defeats into inspiration. They study past failures and turn them into learning experiences. They have a saying, 'Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it.'" The display showed clips of humans teaching history. They make their children study wars. They turn battles into games. They recreate historical conflicts for fun. Do you understand? They're training their entire species to think tactically, and they're doing it so naturally that most of them don't even realize it. Ambassador Smith nodded. "My son learned about guerrilla warfare from a video game. He's 6. "Exactly," Professor Red continued. "And it's not just war games. Humans have something called puzzle games that train them to think around problems. They spend hours solving artificial challenges for entertainment. Their adaptability is literally built into their recreation." She showed more cultural artifacts. "They write songs about resistance. They tell stories about overcoming impossible odds. They've made defeating superior forces into an art form. They call them underdog stories, and they're one of the most popular forms of human entertainment." The display shifted to show human social media. "And then there's this. Humans share information and ideas at an incredible rate. They can spot patterns, find weaknesses, and develop countermeasures faster than any species we've studied. They do this instinctively, constantly, and worst of all, they think it's fun. Wilson looked increasingly uncomfortable, but our superior technology. They have stories about that too. Professor Red interrupted. They call it David versus Goliath. They love nothing more than stories about primitive forces defeating advanced ones. They study these stories. They internalize them. They believe in them. She showed more examples. They have countless tales of smaller forces defeating larger ones, of primitive weapons overcoming advanced technology, of clever solutions defeating superior power. These aren't just stories to them. They're instruction manuals. Ambassador Smith stood up again. We also have stories about peaceful first contact and successful cooperation. We just like to be prepared for all possibilities. Professor Red nodded. Yes, and that's perhaps the most important point. Humans are equally prepared for peace or war. They prefer peace, but they're ready for anything else. She turned to Wilson. And they've spent centuries thinking about exactly how to defeat someone like you. The young delegate sat in stunned silence as Professor Red gathered her materials. To summarize, invading Earth wouldn't just be fighting their military. You'd be fighting against every solution humans have imagined, every strategy they've discussed, and every tactic they've practiced in their games and stories. They'd been preparing for you since before they knew you existed. The council chamber had grown unusually quiet. Wilson, the once enthusiastic delegate, sat slumped in his chair, his purple skin now a pale lilac. Elder Gray was about to call for the next speaker when Ambassador Smith finally stood up. "If I may," he said, walking to the central platform, "I'd like to add a few final thoughts." The chamber watched as the human calmly placed his thermos on the podium. Unlike the previous speakers, he didn't activate the holographic display. "Everything you've heard today is true," Smith began. "Earth is dangerous. Humans are stubborn. We've turned survival into a hobby and preparation into entertainment." He smiled warmly. "But that's not what makes Earth impossible to invade." Wilson looked up, his antenna twitching with curiosity despite his obvious distress. "The real reason," Smith continued, "is that we'd rather be friends." He gestured around the chamber. "Look at this council. Hundreds of species working together, trading, sharing knowledge, building something greater than ourselves. That's what humans dream about." He pulled out a small object from his pocket, a simple metal pin showing Earth's continents. "We spent centuries imagining alien invasions, yes, but we spent even more time imagining peaceful contact. We wrote countless stories about joining a galactic community, about exploring the stars together, about building something wonderful." Ambassador Smith walked to the edge of the platform. "Yes, we're dangerous. Yes, we're stubborn. Yes, we turn everything into a competition, including friendship. Do you know what happens when humans decide you're their friend? They'll fight the entire galaxy to protect you." He turned to Wilson. "Young delegate, you saw Earth as a primitive planet, ripe for conquest. Would you like to know what we saw when we first met alien life?" Smith's eyes twinkled. "We saw potential. We saw new friends to trade jokes with, new cultures to learn from, new perspectives to understand." The chamber was completely silent now. "Earth isn't waiting to be conquered," Smith continued. "Earth is waiting to be amazed, to be delighted, to learn and share and grow. Yes, we're ready for war, but we're even more ready for peace." He picked up his thermos again. "Did you know that when humans meet someone new, one of the first things we do is offer them food or drink? It's a universal human gesture of friendship." He smiled at the nearest delegates. "I've been offering all day, but everyone seems too nervous to try coffee." A few nervous laughs echoed through the chamber. "So here's my suggestion," Smith said, addressing Wilson directly. "Instead of planning an invasion, why not plan a cultural exchange? Instead of testing our defenses, why not test our sciences? Instead of becoming our enemies." He walked over and extended his hand to Wilson. "Why not become our friends?" Wilson stared at the offered hand, his antenna moving in confused patterns. "Because I promise you," Smith continued, his voice carrying through the silent chamber, "if you become friends with humanity, you'll discover something far more interesting than our defensive capabilities. You'll discover why we're out here among the stars in the first place." Elder Gray leaned forward. "And why is that, Ambassador?" Smith smiled broadly. "Because we're curious. Because we're adventurous. Because we looked up at the stars and thought, I wonder what's out there. And now that we're here," he gestured around the chamber, "we're having the time of our lives." Wilson slowly stood up. "I would like to withdraw my proposal for invasion," he said formally. "Excellent choice," Elder Gray nodded. "And would you like to propose an alternative?" Wilson looked at Ambassador Smith's still extended hand. Carefully, he reached out and shook it. "I would like to propose a cultural exchange program with Earth." The chamber erupted in applause. Smith grinned and poured a small cup of coffee. "Here," he said, offering it to Wilson. "Let's start right now. Just be careful. It's hot." As Wilson cautiously accepted the cup, Elder Gray's voice rang out. "Let the records show. Earth remains as it should be. Not a target for conquest, but a partner in civilization. And let us remember the old saying, Earth isn't where empires go to conquer. It's where empires go to learn."